Welcome back to Level Construction. Now that we have got all of our structural static meshes in place, as well as our decoration static meshes, it's time for us to move into the world of lighting. Getting this level lit is actually quite a big task to make it look really rich with a lot of depth, a lot of shadows, a lot of, atmosphere. There's a lot of lights that we're going to need to set up, and this can take quite a bit of time. So let's take a look at this in a simplistic form. Basically, there's 3 different stages we need to go through. Stage number 1 is we need to set up all of our light fixtures. Once again, these are static meshes that, appear as light-emitting sources, meaning things like fluorescent bulbs, any kind of lamps that we might find appropriate to scatter throughout the level, etc., etc. We need to get all of those things into place, because right now, it's really just structural meshes and decorations that we've put in there so far. Now, once we get all of our lighting fixtures in place, we'll then need to put actual light into our map, because remember, these static meshes, they don't emit light. Light actors emit light. So we'll set up all of our lights, we'll set up their properties, and once we have all of that in place, the level should have a pretty good feel going on. From there, what we'll do is begin the final stage, which is really getting everything tweaked out so that we have the final look we're aiming for. Now, this is a lot of stuff that we need to do. So what we've done to help simplify everything is done everything off camera. Now, Logan has already created all of our static meshes. So we're going to start out by going around talking about all the static meshes that we've placed into this level, as well as where we got them from. Logan?
All right, let's begin and take a look at some of these new meshes that have been placed. We'll begin with these fluorescent light fixtures. You'll note that around the room we have a various assortment of fluorescent light fixtures. And it's really very simple. There's only 2 different kinds of fluorescent light bulb we're actually using in this level. And to bring up the mesh used, I'm going to right-click on any one of them and sync the generic browser so we can take a look at what package they came from, as well as what specific mesh we used. Looking at this bulb, we can see that it came from the LT Light package, and the mesh used was Light SM Fluorescent 01B. You'll also note that right next to it there's a shorter bulb, which is probably what's been used for things like the little alcove in here. If I sync to this bulb here, one other thing I want to do, since I've already placed these, is let me go ahead and turn off my manipulator and prevent the mouse from accessing or moving anything around. That way I won't worry about nudging anything as I try to go through select meshes and show off their purpose. Now, looking at this mesh, let me sync the generic browser to it, and we can see that the selection jumps to one to the left, so we have this kind of short fluorescent bulb and the longer fluorescent bulb. And you'll note that they've been placed through quite a few locations. Starting in the alcove, we have 2 up at the top level, kind of matching the height level of the walkway. So these would be, you could say, on the 2nd story. And if we move down, we've got another set in the lower part here, near all the boxes, and you could count that as the 1st story of lighting. Now, outside of the alcove, if we back just a little bit into the main room, we can see that we have several of the longer light fixtures added. So one on the top level, one on the bottom level near the big machine object, one over by the gas tank, and some over by the lift. Over by the lift, actually, it looks like we have some of the shorter bulbs, so 2 on the bottom and 1 off on the top on the side. Now, you'll note on the lift support I-beam girder on the back, there's a series of bulbs, and these are actually the same small one. As a matter of fact, I can sync and prove that. If I sync the generic browser, we can see that it is, once again, this fluorescent light bulb that's being used, only it's been scaled down. You can see that the overall scale has been dropped by 0.5, and then the scale in its local X has been scaled down by an additional 0.5. And then after that, this light was duplicated 6 times and then fit into the girder. As a matter of fact, if I jump to a top view, I can zoom way in on those and show how here we have the girder mesh, and then we have the light fixtures tucked right in on that inner lip. So that takes care of the light fixtures. There's actually a group of 6 both above and below the lift itself. And I think that's all the light sources that were added into this room, aside from the one up on the ceiling, but I'll get to that in a second. One other thing I want to point out is that on some of our static meshes, both structural and I think some decorational, they have portions built into them that look like they should be emitting light. For example, this walkway has this light, almost like a fluorescent tube built into it. So when we go to add actual lights into the map, we'll need to take things like this into account and place light sources near them. Now, up in the top of this room, an additional mesh that we've added is this large square style mesh. And this is actually comprised of several different individual meshes. If I grab the large gray outer ring and sync the generic browser, what we're looking at is once again an LT light, and it's the SM octagon light frame mesh. Now inside of it we've placed this octagon light bulb, but we've had to scale it up. It's about as small as one of these openings, so we had to scale it up by about 2.5 in X and Y to get it to fit nicely into the main octagon mesh. Then to that mesh we've added several more things just to kind of spice it up a little bit, make it look a little bit less bland. And for that we can see we've taken this face light 01F, excuse me, and we've placed that around the 4 dividing sections of the light mesh itself. We've also placed this SM Light 01 off in the center, just to give it a nicer look to it. So let's see, what else have we added since the decoration and structural lesson? I think that's it for the first room, so let's take a look at the second room now. In the second room, you'll see at the very top of the lift, we've got 4 new spotlight meshes. If I grab one of these and sync the generic browser, what we're looking at is HU lights, and the mesh name is Floodlight 01. These are the lights placed around. As a matter of fact, there's 4 of them placed around the 4 supports to the lift system. Now you notice in front of them, these lights actually have light cones added to them. And those light cones are created with a different static mesh. If I select it and sync the generic browser, we can see that this is the LT Light SM Light Cone 02. Now here's something else interesting to note. If we look carefully at this preview, we can see that we have kind of a yellowish light that goes with this mesh, and that is the default material applied to the mesh. And you'll notice if I deselect everything and we zoom in really close, I've got kind of a bluish color applied, which goes much more nicely with this bluish spotlight. So in order to find that, let me show what property was changed. If I grab any one of these light cones and bring up their properties, I can go into the static mesh actor and then scroll down to rendering, down to materials, and you'll note that I have added an element to the materials array. And if we load up the static mesh browser for this specific material, give it just a second to load, you can see we've got a material instance constant that we've applied, which is LT underscore, and then give it just a second to load.
It's coming. Here she comes.
And there we go. Under LT Light, we've got a material section, and the material added is SM Light Cone 01 Color C. Color C is the one that's blue. As a matter of fact, you can see Light Cone 01, that was the yellow original. So, just pointing that out to note that if you add this mesh in, just stock from the static mesh browser, you have to go and add the element to the material, and then select that specific material instance. Now you'll also note in this room that we've got a bunch more of the fluorescent light tube style lights positioned in the same configuration as they were in the other room. 6 of them placed inside of the I-beams, both on the top level and on the bottom level. And looking at it, I think that's all the added meshes that come to mind as far as additional light source meshes.
Okay.
So let's see.
Now at this point what we can do is go ahead and switch over to a lit mode.
Alright.
And they can see what the actual lighting effects are inside our level now that we've actually placed lights in the level. So that's kind of us going into stage 2 now.
Right. So I guess along with this now we could bring in all of the lights that we've added. So what I'm going to do is load up the generic browser and switch over to groups, and I'm going to turn on a lights group that I created. Once I show all the lights, now we're showing all the actual light actors that we added to the scene. And let me start around the same general area and just point out what was done for some of the key lights and what some of their properties were, starting with some of the fluorescent lights. As a matter of fact, starting with this one over on the very corner, next to the first fluorescent light tube. I'll grab this light and hit F4 to bring up its properties, and let me point out some of the key properties. You'll note just by looking closely in the viewport here that the light has kind of a purple-bluish tint to it. And the reason is that the light color has been set to a very light blue. As a matter of fact, if we bring up the color picker, you can see that we grabbed a very rich royal blue and then set the color to a very light shade, just off white. So that gives us that nice, you could say, hotter color in the spectrum for the light used here, a hotter color temperature. Other key properties are the fluorescent light for these sides have been set to a brightness of 2. And this one in particular has, let me collapse the lighting channels down so we can see what we're looking at. It has a radius of 224. So if we scroll back, we can see that that's about the area that it should be affecting. Now if we switch our attention to the light used right next to the lift, this light has the same color, the same brightness, and the same radius, so it's effectively the same light. And most of the fluorescent ones, as a matter of fact, all of the ones sourced from these fluorescent light tubes should share this color. You should generally share the brightness, and we'll just usually simply adjust the radius, depending on how much of the level it's supposed to affect. So I'll go through a few of these and see if any of them have changed. You'll note that some of the lights placed by the larger light fixtures have a radius of 384. And of course we have more of these fluorescent style lights in the alcove room for the top and bottom. And along the bottom here, inside the main room, along each of the fluorescent lights. Now moving on from that, you'll note the walkway that I had pointed out earlier. Because it has a light source on the edges, we've added individual lights to each of the little outcroppings. Even on these corner pieces, if we zoom in really close, here we can see that there's little light emitting areas. So we've added a small light near each of them to give a kind of walkway floor lighting. And if I load up one of these lights, we can take a look at some of its properties. Generally, these lights will have a brightness of 1, and will have a color that matches this color of the tube light. You can see that this is more of a yellowish color along the floor. So what we've done is we've selected a color that matches that color. So that way it makes sense that a more yellowish light fixture would emit more yellowish colored light. And also we have set the radius to about 192 for each of these running lights. So if we look at a few of these, pretty much all of these should match with the color and the radius of 192. And you'll note that we've placed a lot of these all along the walkway. So if we just move really slowly through here, we've got a whole lot. So into this room we now have pretty much one light at every single visible light source along all of the walkways, both top and bottom. Also note that the doorway mesh has its light strip across the top, and for that we've used the same light, same color, because I mean it seems to match pretty much with what the running lights on the floor were. So same idea, brightness of 1, color of yellowish, off-white, and a radius of 192. So of course we have several of those since we have a doorway on this side, we have a doorway over here. So everywhere there's a doorway we've dropped one of these same running color lights. Now I believe the lights on the bottom are actually a slightly different color, a little bit darker. Generally match pretty close, but looking at the light in here, it's slightly more brown colored. Let's see, that takes care of the running lights. Let's move our attention back into this first room, and let's take a look at the light by the neon sign. If we select that light, we can see that we've got a brightness of 1.5. Since this is a rather large sign, we wanted to have its impact be a little bit more significant on the scene. And the color we've selected is, of course, an orange color to kind of match the inside edge of the neon sign. And we've also set a radius of 576 because, again, this is a very prominent object in the scene, so we want to affect a large portion of the scene with this light.
And you can see a lot of light blending with that color, too.
Right. If we look up on these meshes, you can see a very heavy orange tinting on this side, even a little bit on the other side, which makes sense with the rather large radius. Moving up from that, we've got a fluorescent light placed below this big quadrant mesh, and its brightness has been turned all the way up to 2, which again makes sense because it's a very prominent and very bright looking light fixture. The color selected is the standard fluorescent off blue color, and the radius we're using here is 640 units, so we affect a large portion of the room with this light. Now you notice that each of these quarter circle meshes that we used to place in the ceiling also have visible light sources. So we've used a running light style light, brightness of 1, the yellowish color to match those lights. And on these particular ones, we've lowered the radius down to 128 since they're rather small and we don't want them to interfere too much with the other lights because we have 2 very bright lights placed side by side, so we don't want to wash this part of the level out. So let's see. Let's look at these monitors now. Over on the wall, we have a few more lights placed by the monitors. We've made these rather dim just because we didn't want the monitors to make this side of the level over bright. We wanted the screens to stay brighter than the framework meshes. So we've got the brightness set down to 2.5. We've also selected a darker gray color, which kind of matches the color. It was probably derived from this this mesh because we have a gray looking screen. And we've also got a radius of 512. So we have a somewhat larger radius, but that makes it affect this floor area in front of the monitors nicely. Now, if we look out in the center of the room, we have a lot of lights lining the floor, almost in a row across the room. And these are simply fill lights for the room. We've got a very low brightness on them. a rather large radius, or I guess you could say a medium-sized radius of about 384, but a very dark, dirty-looking gray color. And the idea is for these lights are just there to prevent any areas of pure black within the level, just to give a little bit of fill light, a very low undertone lighting. And that's the same idea with these row of lights that we've placed next to the brighter ones on the ceiling. A more dim light using that dirtier, dark gray color. And let's see, am I missing any lights in this main room? I think that takes care of the first room. Let me see if there's anything interesting to point out in the second room. Let's see, looking at the generators, we've got lights placed around these bases because we have a nice yellowish glow all around the base to the generators. So if we take a look at those, they're kept fairly dim because, again, we don't want to over-brighten this part. It's supposed to be a nice, dingy, dark part of the level. The color has simply been selected to match kind of an average of what these colors would look like around the base. And the radius for these has been set to 320. Now, one interesting thing to note is we've got a nice kind of lighting effect going on inside of the center of the generator, and that was accomplished using a light that's hidden right inside, placed in the very center of the generator. And if we select that light, aside from its color and brightness, its brightness has been turned up a little bit, but more importantly,
right up at the top, cast shadows.
Cast shadows for this has been turned off. The reason is because this is placed inside the mesh, but we're using this light to get this nice inner glow around the generator. So we've turned cast shadows off so that the light emanates out from the center of the mesh and nicely fills in the mesh itself.
Right.
And this has, of course, been done for both meshes on either side. There's a few lights placed in back behind the support girders just to go along with the lights on that support pillar. Nothing really special there. The brightness has been turned down somewhat, more so just because there's a lot of them in close proximity and we don't want to over-brighten this part of the level. The color is set to a very light yellow, and that's just because the little lights placed on here are mostly white, but you can see on the edges they're kind of yellowish colored. So let's see. Are there any other interesting lights? I think that covers all of the things that are emitting light and their associated light properties. We've got the spotlights up here. They're set to a brightness of 2. They have a color that matches this kind of glaring blue highlight that's inside of the light mesh itself. So relatively simple. They're relatively standard spotlights just aimed in a direction matching the static mesh. But that brings us to the next thing that I wanted to point out, and that is the spotlights are not actually emitting any visible light, at least none that we can see. And the reason for this is the meshes that were used, placed around them, both the mesh of the light fixture and the light cone itself. If we go into the properties for those and go inside the static mesh component section, go down to lighting, we can see that cast shadow is on by default for static meshes, including this light cone static mesh. So what's happening is we have a working spotlight here, but we have meshes placed very close to it, and they're absorbing all of the light. So if we select these cone meshes, and you'll note the spotlight meshes also have this turned on. They both have cast shadows turned on. Select one of each, right-click on them, and select all matching static meshes so that we get all 4 of the light spotlight sources and light cones. And let's scroll down and turn cast shadows off for those. And with those off already, it seems like the static mesh is picking up a little bit, but we'll need to rebuild to see that effect. So it shouldn't take too long, so I'm going to spend just a minute, rebuild everything in the level, and we should see these pick up on the static mesh and on the surrounding walls.
Yeah, having them cast shadows means basically they were just blocking all light from getting out to those walls.
Right, because the spotlights were placed inside that light fixture static mesh. And you'll notice we have a whole host of warnings in the map check, but we'll get to those in just a minute. More importantly now, if we look over here, let me deselect those meshes. Now check out the generators. We can see a nice bright blue highlight on the meshes. If we turn around, there's a blue light being added over and cast into the corners and over here. So that has fixed a problem that we induced by adding static meshes directly over these lights. Now let's see.
Let's go ahead and take a look at the interactors real quick.
Let's look at the lift. You'll notice that the lift, both here and on the other side of the map, Let me scroll up here.
Black.
They're both completely black. And the reason is interp actors are set up to only accept light on the dynamic channels. And the reason being is that their purpose is to move, and therefore we can't build static lighting on them. We rely on dynamic lighting in order to light these. And none of the lights around them have been set to cast light on the dynamic channel. Now, we're not going to set that here. We're actually going to leave that to the movers section. When we set up the movement for these objects, we'll also turn on the necessary dynamic channel for the surrounding lights. But I just wanted to point out that until we have some lights casting on the dynamic channel, we won't see any light on our interp actors. Alright, let me go back over to the other room and point out something else that's kind of interesting. And that is, inside these gratings, they aren't blocking quite as much light as I was hoping, and we can still see the wall inside of them. So if you were running around, you could kind of look up into the grate and notice that it goes absolutely nowhere. Now, an easy fix to this could be to just take all of the surfaces inside here and tell them not to accept lights. So I could grab one of the surfaces and hit Shift-B to grab all of the surfaces on the brush, hit F5 to bring up the surface properties, and under lighting I could uncheck accept lights, uncheck accept dynamic lights, and I'll leave force light map alone because I'm just worried about whether or not these accept lights. So if I turn that off and rebuild, let me actually grab the rest of them just so that we only have to build once to get the final effect. Go to the next grating, hit Shift-B, hit F5, do not accept lights, go to the third and final grating, go to the surface behind it, hit Shift-B, go to its properties with F5, and no accepting lights, and deselect, and let's rebuild. This is an easy way to get around the fact that we can see in there, just make it completely black. The other alternative would be to spend the time to build an entire room and add some very low lighting effect to it. But that way, if there was a room, it would look like it kind of leads to a tunnel or a duct. But since it's not that important, I mean, you have to get right up on there to see, but now it's like staring into pitch black. We can't see into it, so it doesn't break the effect. It just looks like it's very dark inside the grating. So I like keeping those off unless we have an actual room inside of there.
Okay.
Now let's see, what else do we want to look at? Let's
I actually want to go and take a look at all the warnings that you just had. Bunch of them.
Let me bring the map check back up. Let's go to Tools and let's check the map for errors. Now notice a lot of these errors are the same thing. A bunch of warnings saying that an actor has B except light set but only uses unlit materials. Let's see which actor it's talking about. Let's double click on one of those. And we end up selecting the glass mesh. And the deal here is that the material that this mesh uses doesn't accept lights, but the mesh itself does. And we could easily correct that. If we jump into properties real quick, we point out the property here, and that is under lighting, and B accept lights is checked. So in order to quickly correct this, what I could do is select one of the straight pieces of glass, one of the curved pieces of glass, then select all matching meshes, and with all 16 of those meshes selected, go down to the lighting section and turn off accepts lights. So now when we rebuild, we should no longer get that. As a matter of fact, I probably could have just hit check map for errors again, but wasn't thinking it was too quick to hit the build button. But it won't take that long.
No.
Lighting's building pretty quickly.
Actually, it's almost done.
So a few more seconds on our build. Let it handle some light maps. And check it out. That's cleared up everything, except this one last warning that's warning us that there are 60 unnecessary material references. So what it's saying is that as we've moved brushes around and stuck brushes together, there's about 60 unnecessary faces that have materials applied. And it's suggesting that we clean Bsp materials to get rid of this warning, which we could do under Tools. We could say clean Bsp materials. It has cleaned the 60 materials it thought it would. And if we rerun check map for errors, we have no warnings. So we've completely cleaned up all of those warnings. Alright, let's see.
Alright, with all of that out of the way, do you want to go ahead and start talking about the Bsp surfaces?
Right, we can, let's see. Which of these do we want to hit first? We can take a look at the resolution, or we can see... I think that was the... all I wanted to do for Bsp surfaces was clean the materials.
No, I'm talking about the resolution on the Bsp surfaces.
I see. Let me get to that. Let's see after the ratings. Well, we've taken care of almost everything else, so yeah, I think that's one of the few things left. What I wanted to point out there with Bsp surfaces was the fact that in these sections we have some rather nicely detailed meshes, but really low resolution shadows casting on those walls.
Exactly.
So what we can do is we can select some choice Bsp surfaces For starters, these three on this side of the main room. Bring up the properties, and we can change the light map resolution for the surfaces. For these, I might try a resolution of 8. And of course, just like in the lighting lesson, what this means is the lower light map resolution we use, the more dense light map we use for the specific surface. So the higher numbers mean more blurry shadows, lower numbers mean more clear and crisp shadows. So I could try lowering this from 32 down to 8 and rebuild.
Which this also means we're going to have to deal with longer rebuild times.
Right, because we have much greater light map resolution, more data that it has to process. So it will take somewhat longer. Just for 3 surfaces, it won't be too terribly long.
No, not that bad.
And we'll let it finish off encoding light maps. And let's take a look at what we've got. Now we've got cleaner shadows, especially behind these light fixtures. I'm almost tempted to turn it up to 4 and see if we can get some really crisp shadows.
Sure.
Let me reselect these 3 surfaces, bring up their properties, and drop the resolution all the way down to 4 and rebuild. There we go. Now we're getting into some nice, well, not that slow, but
just
slower.
A tad slower, sure.
And I'm not going to do this for all the surfaces. First off, because you wouldn't want to. A lot of
you really need to think about your surfaces. Or is this a surface that all the players are going to see, or is it kind of stuck in the background and no one's going to really see it?
Right. There we go. I like this effect here. We can start to really see the definition of the shadows off of the railings, and especially the shadows from these structural meshes here. And what's nice is since this wall otherwise is relatively bland, it's nice to cast some more high-res shadows on it.
Right.
Now, other walls, like the wall back and behind here, that would be a little bit less necessary because we've got a lot of meshes all clouding it. We've got glass in front of it. So it might not make as much sense to set a high light map resolution and then unnecessarily take up space and take up build time. Now, one last thing I want to take a look at is how would we go about adjusting the light map resolution so that we could get better looking shadows on the floor? Because notice we've got kind of the same problem going on. We've got a little bit of an orange section which blocks directly over to a gray, like a silver section, and then over to a gray section. And we're not really getting any shadow definition whatsoever from the overhead mesh. If we wanted to get more detailed shadows on static meshes like these, we could select the meshes that we want. I'm going to select all of the floor meshes. So what I'm going to do is look for one of the broken tile pieces and keep selecting until I get a few. There's one. And then with some of these selected, grab all matching, so I grab the entire floor, bring up its properties, and then near the bottom we should have a override. Let's see, where was it at? We've got static mesh component. B override light map resolution is checked. If we turn this off, we will stop overriding that resolution and use a higher resolution for these meshes. So if I deselect them now and rebuild lighting once again, we should get much better shadow definition on these floors. And it does seem to have affected the build time just a little bit. Not taking a little bit more significant of a time to finish up the build.
And in this case, it's really going to be worth it because the floor is going to look so much nicer.
Right, we'll start to pick up shadow definition off of that mesh up above. Alright, just about done encoding the light maps. And give it just a few more seconds. Almost there. So close. But yeah, we are dealing with higher resolution maps now. And close out the map check window. And check this out. Look at the floor. We've got a smoother transition from the different light colors and shadows being cast from the pipe walkway above. So much nicer looking shadows on the floor.
Very cool.
And with that, I think that's all I wanted to point out in regards to the lighting techniques and placement for this map.
Yeah, again, we could have spent, I don't know, 2 hours, 2.5 hours going through and setting up every single fluorescent bulb, our light fixtures, etc., and then come in here and set up all of our different light actors and set all of their properties, colors, brightnesses, etc. But that would have been a very long, very tedious video where you would not really have got a lot out of it. I mean, I think by doing it this way, it was a much cleaner approach. You can still watch the video, go in there and follow, because it really is straightforward. If you have something inside your level that looks like it should be emitting light, put a light actor there and set the color to the appropriate color that appears to be emitting from that particular static mesh so that everything makes sense. Set your radiuses. Make sure to set your fall-offs. We actually didn't do any fall-off setting here, though things still look really nice.
Right, let me check one of the ones in the corner. There was some of these, I didn't check too closely. They may have an adjusted fall-off. These, let me see if the one's above doom. Because remember how I was saying that they affected a large area of the floor? If you wanted, you could tighten up the fall-off exponent, maybe all the way up to 8 on these.
Sure.
I'll rebuild lighting while we're talking about these. And what that's going to do is make sure that the fall-off happens a lot more abruptly. The higher the exponent is, the more tighter of a circle of light that you have around the light in question.
That's right. But in our particular case, we really got nice lighting out of just going in and setting up the radius for each of our lights, the color, and the brightness. And then, of course, doing a bunch of building to test exactly how the light effects are starting to look and fill out light within the level itself.
Right. We also pointed out a few problems we introduced with some of the static meshes, because all static meshes by default cast shadows. And we had a setup where we wanted to place a light inside a static mesh, but we ended up blocking that light altogether in the case of the spotlights.
Exactly.
But you can see here that we've got a much darker corner. We've tightened up this light quite a bit by upping the exponent. So if you wish, you can use that to get a nice bright section near the light and have it fall off a lot more abruptly.
Exactly. Okay, so with that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.